you seek wisdom from an old man, do you? Elminster Aumar at your service, or rather, at your own peril. Yes, yes, the Sage of Shadowdale, the old mage, though I prefer to think of myself as simply a man with an unfortunate abundance of time and far too many books. A little too much power, too, perhaps, but let's not dwell on that. After all, there are worse fates than being chosen by the Lady of Magic herself, Mystra, to meddle with the very weave that shapes this world. Now, I've wandered this land for far more centuries than most can count, my name whispered from the peaks of the Sword Coast to the jungles of Chult, and even among the treacherous folks of the Red Wizards. And believe me, I've seen it all. Kingdoms that rose only to crumble into dust. Heroes who thought themselves invincible until they met something far less pleasant than their reflection in a mirror. And magic. Oh, magic. It has a way of getting tangled up with everything, doesn't it? But we're not here to chat about the rather mundane matters of a few millennia. No, we have far grander things to discuss, if I may say so. There are forces out there, lurking just beneath the surface of our world. Ancient things. Things that have been around so long, even the gods forget their names. Things that will make even a wizard like me raise an eyebrow. And trust me, I've seen enough to make a statue blush. Today, we'll dive into the unknown, peel back the layers of a mystery that has long cast its shadow upon Faerun. It's a tale of power, of ancient beings whose influence stretches through the ages, leaving their mark in ways that even the most powerful wizards can't entirely untangle. So, if you're ready to face the darker corners of our world, those places where even I, Elminster, sometimes tread carefully, then follow along. But be warned, not everything that is uncovered in this tale will be something you'll want to share over tea. Some things, my dear friend, are better left untouched. Unless, of course, you're as foolish as I am. Now I will hand you over to Lorebook for a brief introduction into who I was in my earlier years while I get some tea. Then I will come back to share some of my secrets if an adventurer of your stature would like to listen for a while longer.
Thank you, Elminster. It is a pleasure to have you here in person. Now, on to the story. Elminster's hundreds of years of life are impossible to summarize in a compendium. Archaic records attest to the fact that a son named Elminster was born more than 1,200 years ago to Elthrin, the lord of the village of Helden, and his wife Amrithael. His family was killed by a shadow master named Undal, one of the mage lords of the ancient kingdom of Atalanta. Taking up his father's sword, Elminster became a brigand and a thief at the age of 12. He soon realized that he had no taste for killing, and gave it up when he went to become a burglar in the city of Hasdal, the capital of Atalanta. It was here that Elminster first met the era's magister, the wizard who bore the mantle of Mystra's power. When asked if he was interested in learning magic, Elminster refused. After many adventures, Elminster was visited by Mystra, the goddess of all magic. She tarried with him and left the awestruck Elminster with the message that he should learn of magic and worship her. Soon thereafter, while he was still a young adult, perhaps to further his worldview, Elminster became Elmara, priestess of Mystra. This change also allowed him to move within his enemies' circles without their knowledge. After more adventures, Elmara was at last ready to become a mage, and Elminster reappeared. In the time that followed, he learned much about magic from the sorceress Miriala, reaching the point where he could finish taking his revenge against the evil mage lords who had usurped the kingdom. After a terrific battle, Elminster persevered and assumed the throne of Atalanta. However, no sooner had he gained the kingship than he passed it to one of his friends, Helm, a knight of Atalanta. Elminster stated that he had wanted to avenge his family's death, not become a monarch. As he and Miriala left the kingdom, the sorceress revealed herself to be Mystra, She offered to make Elminster one of her chosen, and he readily accepted. Many of Elminster's adventures following this time are undetailed, but it is known that he visited such places as Cormanthor, the Towers of Song, and Mythdrana before its fall and stayed some 20 years. For years more he travelled, and only he, and perhaps Leao, knows what transpired. He also served as a foster parent to 3 other of Mistra's chosen over 600 years ago: Silun, Storm, and the woman who hundreds of years later would become his paramour, the Symbol. It is also suspected that he had something to do with the founding of Waterdeep, or at least the organising of the city's lords. The next major adventures Elminster took part in, for which records exist, were the events of the chaotic time of Troubles. He was instrumental in forming the Rangers 3, who aided him in recurring battles with the mysterious Shadow Masters during this time. Elminster also took time out to defend Shadowdale from an army of Zentarim led by the avatar of Bane. The avatar and Elminster did battle in the Old Mage's Tower, and both were caught up in the spell that Elminster had called upon to dispose of the avatar. Elminster was originally thought to have been destroyed, but when he later reappeared, it became apparent that he had merely been transported to another plane of existence for a time. In his absence, the foes of good tried to rally, but the other chosen, the Knights of Mythdrana and Rangers 3, held them at bay until he returned. With the present crisis averted, all seemed calm, but the Shadowmasters had other ideas. Elminster and the Rangers 3, along with their allies, managed to frustrate and foil the plans of this race of shapeshifters. Elminster also confronted the Overgod, Lord I.O., over his instigation of the time of Troubles, while innocents were being killed. As the critical moment of the time of Troubles approached, Mystra knew of what was to come, and she shed most of her power into another, a mortal, so that all of her essence would not cease to exist. This mortal was the Mage Midnight, who went on to become the new manifestation of Mystra. Elminster, you are back. If you could continue letting us know about your life, just after the slaying of Mystra.
Ah, so you wish to know my tale? Then sit, listen well, and let an old man's words weave the tapestry of ages past. The story begins in fire, as all the grandest tales often do. In the year of Blue Fire, 1385 DR, the weave was torn asunder, and with it, so too was I. Mystra, my lady, was slain by that thrice-cursed Cyric and the ever-scheming Shah. The weave collapsed, and Toril writhed in the throes of the spell plague. We, her chosen, were left bereft of her blessings, stripped of the gifts that had been ours since time immemorial. Magic did not leave me entirely, but each spell cast dragged me closer to madness. Only Storm, dear Storm, could bring me back from the brink, offering of herself to keep me tethered to reason. Yet of us all, Alasra, my love, the Symbol, suffered the most. The raw arcane energies of the spell plague consumed her, leaving her in a state of perpetual madness. There came a day when she, lost to reason, turned upon me. The battle that followed shattered Silverhand Farm, rending the land itself asunder. I took her power into myself, a desperate act that left me a menace to the Dales, my very presence twisting the land into plaguelands and raising earth moats where none had been. Adventurers subdued me, leaving me to languish in my grief and regret. But regret alone does not heal wounds. No. Purpose must be forged in the crucible of loss. I sought out magic wherever it could be found, collecting enchanted relics and channeling their energies to Alasra, granting her fleeting moments of clarity. A pitiful balm, but one I would administer as long as I drew breath. The years passed. The world thought me dead, and mayhap that would have been kinder. Storm and I still watched over Faerun from the shadows, stepping forth when needed. When Drow of House Jelray overran Shadowdale, we guided a young adventurer, Kahara Solwood, to drive them back. I even followed the whispers of Mistra's fading voice to Zentil Keep, unmaking the dark ways that Manchun had corrupted. A fine bit of work, that. We took new names, Elgorn and Stornara Rowlagan, servants in the Cormyrian court. But even the grandest masquerades must end. In 1479, DR, weakened as I was, I saw that our struggle could not be fought alone. My old ways of pilfering artifacts to sustain Alasra were running dry. The Nine, I thought. Those accursed artifacts held the power to pierce the palace wards, or better still, to heal my love's shattered mind. But I needed aid, so I sought out my descendant, Amarune Whitewave. Then came the night Manchun, ever the lurking viper, struck. He had been unraveling my contingencies for years, and at last he thought he had slain me. He nearly did. But near death is not death. My essence remained, and with Storm's aid I bound myself to Amarune. A most peculiar experience, I assure ye. Later I learned to share a body with Lord Arclath Delcastle as well. An interesting arrangement, but one must adapt in desperate times. In time, Storm discovered the means to heal Alasra, one of the blue flame artifacts left in the spell plague's wake. We sought to bring it to her in a secluded cave, but of course, Manchun would not allow such peace. He appeared, schemes ever in motion, and for a brief moment, a truce was struck. My old foe and I standing against a greater threat. But villains rarely shed their nature. The moment Alasra left, he struck, casting me into the Underdark. There I drifted, a wraith of thought, until I met Simrustar Oglamir, a name long buried in the annals of Cormanthor. We traveled together, and I found myself inhabiting the form of a drow woman. In time, I made my way back to the surface, to Cormyr, to Amarune, and to the long-awaited return of Mistra. Yet loss waited still. Alasra fought ceaselessly to mend the rifts torn through the realms. She called for aid in her final battle, but I could not reach her in time. The cost was her life. And in my grief, my fury, I turned upon Manchun. Silver fire reduced his form to naught, but I knew, as I always have, that he would return. Evil is tenacious after all. Still, the work did not end. I traveled across the realms, bolstering the weave, foiling plots of the Shadowvar, even wrestling with the damnable Lich Larlock. The second sundering loomed, and we, the Chosen, stood against the tide. Myth Dranor fell, Thultanthar crashed, and still we pressed on.
So Elminster, you must have a long list of allies and enemies. And what of your family?
Ah, family. The grand tangled mess of bloodlines, legacies, and more than a few scandals. Mine is no different, I assure you. Few knew of my parentage, and I rather liked it that way. But since you're prying, I'll humor you. I was born to Elminster Aumar, son of Uthgrail, one of the 7 princes of Athalantar, and Amrithale Goldsheaf, daughter of a woodsman. Quite the unlikely pair, but love has a way of making fools of us all. As for my own romantic entanglements, well, let's just say I've had my fair share. Some grand, some fleeting, and some I'd rather not discuss after a few pints of ale. One of my children, Nanra Shalas, earned a reputation of her own as the silken shadow of Marsemba, and somewhere down the line my lineage produced Simon Aumar, a half-elf sorcerer and thief, no doubt causing mischief in ways that would make me proud or exasperated. Friends and allies. I've had a few. From my fellow thief, Farl, in my younger years, to Kelben Arunsun, a fellow archmage and ideological thorn in my side. I've worked alongside the wise and the foolish, the noble and the nefarious, and a fair few who were a bit of both. Names like Gorion of Candlekeep, Ron Tides of High Moon, and Maris Corma Terrabin have crossed my path more than once. Even royalty sought my counsel, or more often my intervention, like Regent Alusair Obarskir of Cormyr, Count Gamelon Idegir, and even the Dragon Lord Mei Lung. Now, if you're thinking my influence was limited to Toril, think again. I've shared drinks and knowledge with wizards from other worlds, Mordenkainen from Earth, Dalamar from Kryn, and even a certain Ed of the Greenwood from Earth. Yes, that one. He serves an excellent piña colada, I'll give him that. Of course, my strongest bonds have always been with Mistra's Chosen. We shared more than just power. We shared purpose, triumphs, and tragedies. The Seven Sisters, Mistra's daughters, were particularly dear to me. I raised 3 of them, Ambara, Anamanue, and Astorma, who later took the name Storm Silverhand. Storm and I traveled together for centuries, and to this day, there's none I trust more. Now, an old wizard doesn't get by without a few loyal souls watching his back. My scribe Leo served me well, even while being entangled with Queen Zaranda Star of Tether. And then there's Volo. Yes, that Volo, whose books were as full of errors as they were of good intentions. My relationship with Vangadahast Ayulvana of Cormyr was a rivalry in the friendliest sense, though I'd wager he saw it as a battle of wits. He lost, of course. Adventurers often sought my aid, and I, in turn, found them to be useful allies. The Knights of Myth Dranor, the Rangers 3, and even several clans of dwarves considered me a blood brother. I've even counted dragons among my friends, Gizentraxia, to name one. As for apprentices, I took on a fair few over the years. Some, like Lycan Wolfbeard and Simgaril Maruel, turned out well enough. Others, like Raelin, met unfortunate ends. Thieving from me at a mage fair is not what one might call a wise decision. Some students, like Vangadahast, never wore the title apprentice, yet learned much from me nonetheless. And then there was Samaster. Brilliant, but consumed by his own ambition. His obsession with Mistra led him down a dark path, one that ended with him founding the cult of the dragon. If ever there was a lesson in the dangers of unchecked power, Samaster was it. For a time, I stopped taking on students altogether. Watching so many young mages succumb to their own hunger for power wore heavy on my heart. Magic should be a gift, not a curse, but too many failed to understand that. Romance? Aye, there was plenty of that. None so powerful as my first love, Mistra herself. She and I shared a bond unlike any other through love and loss across lifetimes. And then there was Alasra Silverhand, the Witch Queen of Aglarond. Our love spanned over a century, through war, tragedy, and even madness itself. Through it all, I remained by her side as best I could. Of course, an old mage collects enemies like a boot collects mud. The Malogrim, shape-shifting horrors from the plane of shadow, took a particular dislike to me after I ruined their invasion plans. I also had the misfortune of crossing paths with Manshun, founder of the Zentarim. Our rivalry ranged from humiliating him in front of his own allies to outright killing each other, though I'd say I came out ahead in the end. Then there were the more mundane threats. House Karanok of Chesenta put a hefty price on my head, and even Velsharoon, before his ascent to demigodhood, saw me as an obstacle. Ah well, a wizard's life is never dull.
Thank you, Elminster, for your time. What we usually do is to give our fellow adventurers a little glimpse of wisdom, so that when they are on their next adventure, they will go forth with a little hope, and hopefully a little inspiration.
Perfect. As with many of my students, they more often than not have that wisdom just below the surface waiting to be reached. But what have we learned from all this? Besides the fact that mortals have an uncanny knack for meddling with forces far beyond their ken. If there's one truth I've gathered over my many, many years, it's that power, be it magic, knowledge, or sheer stubbornness, always comes with a price. And the moment you think you've mastered it, well, that's when the realms like to remind you just how small you truly are. Perhaps you've glimpsed some of those truths today, that the past is never truly buried, only waiting to be uncovered, that the most dangerous forces are often those we barely understand, and that even the grandest empires, the mightiest wizards, and the oldest gods can be brought low by forces unseen. If nothing else, remember this: curiosity is a fine thing, but too much of it can land you in the belly of something with far too many teeth, or worse, in the hands of something that doesn't need teeth to destroy you. So tread carefully, my friend. Seek knowledge, but be wary of the doors you open. And if ever you find yourself standing before something vast, ancient, and eager to whisper secrets into your ear, well, do an old wizard a favor and ask yourself whether knowing is truly worth what comes next. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I've earned a drink. Or 3. Oh, before I go, Lorebook has asked me to notify you all that they have a Patreon and YouTube memberships that you should all be a part of. I can tell you from experience, the passion and love they have for books is second to none. So at least take a look for an old wizard such as myself. Now I best be off for that drink. See you all for the next tale.